Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about The Suicide Squad? Stick around and find out. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of The Suicide Squad, not to be confused with 2016's Suicide Squad movie? I can't remember. Anyway, this is it's a pseudo-sequel, pseudo-reboot, takes place in the same continuity, but doesn't require you to have any knowledge of the Suicide Squad movie that came before. The synopsis for this one on IMDb reads, supervillains Harley Quinn, Bloodsport, Peacemaker, and a collection of nutty cons at Belle Reve Prison join the super-secret, super-shady Task Force X as they are dropped off at the remote enemy-infused island of Corto Maltese. Okay, so what does this thing feel like? You know, I think there's been a lot of questions from fans. James Gunn, known for directing the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, was now given the job to kind of revive or give another chance to this ensemble, quirky ensemble, super people kind of movie. You know, they're not super heroes, but and it definitely feels different from Guardians of the Galaxy, definitely feels different from most Marvel movies. I think there's some parallels to Deadpool that one could make, but are those really Marvel movies? Well, I guess kind of, but anyway. The tone here I found to be largely comedic, but often darkly comedic. Very violent, plenty of action, but also not aiming for like stylized visual spectacle and stunts and stuff as the main point of appeal. It's about, I think, largely these different unusual characters interacting with each other, reacting to each other, butting heads with each other based on their contrasting personality traits. Because it's comedy, I think it'll likely get away with a lot of what I would consider logical problems in the story, in the same sense that we don't demand slapstick comedies to make sense and be logical. I think audiences are likely going to forgive a lot of that kind of thing going on in this movie. It reminds me a bit tonally of the Kick-Ass movies and the Deadpool movies, but like without the drama of Kick-Ass, which I have to admit I miss. I really do like, even in comedies, to have some nice drama in there, or lacking also the meta humor of Deadpool. It's just not going for that. Numerous times things seem to happen not because they were a logical progression of events, but because the writer felt they would be interesting, surprising, or funny. And again, that's not a criticism, that's a valid thing that many comedies do. So if you can accept the story on those terms, I think you'll be much better off. I am really hit or miss with comedies, so for me, that it's not a criticism, but the net result is a downside of the movie for me. Is like, well, I don't connect with a lot of the comedy because I seem to have a cold, dead heart. I only laughed about maybe half of the jokes of this one, but that's pretty good for me for a movie of this type. I always loved how the Suicide Squad comic could take third or fourth tier, has-been or never were villains in the DC universe and revitalize them in cool ways, often, just before killing them off. And this movie does that for a number of characters, in some cases not long before killing them off. It leans into the ridiculousness of their concepts or their costumes, while also in many cases contrasting that with how dangerous or capable they actually are. And I really like that contrast that's been present in the Suicide Squad comic book and that was present in this movie. So as a moderate fan of the comic series, this was a pretty satisfying adaptation, I thought, though I personally would have liked to have felt some suspense in the mix, some drama in the mix, more than what we got here. As far as the cast and performances, I thought the cast was full of great performers that were really suited to their roles here. A standout for both the way the character was written and the way it was performed was David, I'm going to mess up his last name, David Dastmalchian as Polka Dot Man. If you don't know who I'm talking about, he's just gonna, when you see him in this movie, he's gonna be a familiar face. He is known for playing odd or somewhat creepy supporting roles, and is both creepy and endearing in this movie to me. Harley Quinn, played by Margot Robbie, I have to say has worn out her welcome with me a bit. I've never been a particular fan of the character to begin with, so that's not really a knock on her performance. But on top of that, some of her punchlines felt overlong in this movie instead of short and really impactful as I would prefer. It's like, oh, you could have delivered that punchline with fewer words, and I think it would have got me, would have taken me off guard a little bit more. But it kind of outstayed its welcome by just adding an extra phrase to the punchline. I'm like, oh no, it's the rhythm's off, and I'm not feeling it. I definitely got a number of chuckles from her throughout the movie, but I'm more than content to know that Margot Robbie now plans to take a break from this character for a while. She has brought Harley to life, I think, as well as anyone could, but I have definitely had my fill at this point. But I did really appreciate Viola Davis's Amanda Waller. She played the same character in the original Suicide Squad movie, but this felt more true to the comic book character, who is much more cold and hard and tough as nails. They brought all that out, both in the writing and performance in this movie, and really, I enjoyed that. As far as the stunts and visuals go, the spectacle that is very common in this movie is a mix of practical and CG. So they don't really lean overly heavy on either one. I mean, personally, I don't think you could lean overly heavy on practical. I love practical stunts and effects. It results in an unusual tonal blend to me, though, because many locations are gritty and realistic. Lots of the explosions and things getting kind of tossed around or rocked around by explosions and other things going on have a very gritty, realistic, practical feel. But the CG quality and the creature designs, maybe even more significantly, often felt unashamedly animated or just a little bit silly or light or cartoony, just a little bit moving in that direction, rather than going for realism. So it's consistent with the contrasting tones of violence and comedy that the rest of the movie has, so I don't have a complaint in that regard, but I still personally would have enjoyed a more realistic, grounded target that they were aiming for. The action is almost always brutal, bloody, and gory, and often for darkly comedic effect. So if that's your thing, and it is a number of times my thing, there's a healthy dose for you here. All right, themes. Is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? A very present story element that may be less a theme and more kind of an unintended revealing of the writer's views is that in this movie, the U.S. government has just been up to some horrible, nasty stuff for decades and is still covering it up, even if that means incredible loss of human life. Now, I'm not politically oriented, I vote and stuff like that, but I mean, I'm not passionately political in any sense. But I do find this anti-government attitude that's expressed here an interesting and ironic statement coming from the traditionally left-leaning Hollywood machine. That strikes me as more of like a right-wing thing to be distrustful of the government, to say the government, we need to watch out for them, and the left tends to lean more toward, no, we should have more government programs, we should give the government more authority, more power, more involvement in our lives and stuff like that. So I found that a little bit interesting. But perhaps the more intended theme is one that's only briefly stated near the end when a character comments on the usefulness of rats. One of the characters has the ability to control rats. And so there's a character near the end that comments on the usefulness of rats, saying something like, if the most lowly and despised of creatures have a purpose, so do we. And so it's meant to be kind of like this uplifting moment. And it is. It worked for me. This strikes me as being an intended parallel also to the Suicide Squad themselves, which is full of dysfunctional criminals who are put in a position, ironically, to do some good, despite what is so much of what is true about their nature. And of course, that message is relevant also to us. Even if we are dysfunctional and think of ourselves as having little or no worth, we do have purpose, we do have worth, and we are intended to bring about good in this world. What's interesting to me is that the rats are given purpose in this movie only when they are directed by the one who has power over them. It's almost certainly an unintended parallel. Almost certainly, and I would be shocked if the parallel was intended. But I can't help but notice that like the rats in this movie, we can't just kind of conjure up purpose for ourselves, which is often kind of a popular idea, that we can just kind of create our own purpose. But we can't really do that in the same way that the rats can't create their own purpose. But really, like these rats, we only truly fulfill our purpose when directed, and specifically when directed by God. All right, so I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, Redbox this one sometime. You don't want to spend much money on it, but you watch it when it comes to Redbox or a streaming service that you already happen to be paying for. Tonally, it doesn't hit the nail on the head for you like the Kick-Ass movies did. And you're always going to just be comparing these kinds of movies to that, you know. It's more satisfying to you than the first Suicide Squad movie, but not immensely so. A lot of it is just kind of apples and oranges, although it is a bit more satisfying. And yet, you know, you will want to see this sometime, for sure. It's enjoyable enough to give 2 hours of your time to, and it holds promise for what this franchise could be in the future. This one is rated R for strong violence and gore, language throughout, some sexual references, drug use, and brief graphic nudity. And if you're curious about the nudity, I think it's pretty easy to miss in regards to the female frontal nudity in the movie, which happens in passing as they're going through a strip club, and then there's male frontal nudity in a comedic, non-sexual context. All right, those are all my thoughts on The Suicide Squad. I would love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell, please, to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. For info about the benefits of being an insider, you can go to patreon.com/SpiritBladeProductions. I also hope you'll check out our podcast and stay connected to all Christian Geek Central content at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.